The dust-choked air of Promise Creek hung heavy with tension as Katherine O'Brien struggled against the iron grips of three men dragging her across the town's main street. Her honey-brown hair fell loose from its pins, her blue calico dress torn at the shoulder, but it was the fire in her emerald eyes that truly betrayed her spirit. "Let me go, you filthy coyotes," she spat, fighting with every ounce of strength in her slender frame. "I've done nothing wrong." The tallest of her captors, a man with tobacco-stained teeth and breath that reeked of cheap whiskey, laughed cruelly. "Thieving's a hanging offense in these parts, missy, but Mr. Donovan wants to have a word with you first." The year was 1878, and Promise Creek was a dusty speck on the Arizona Territory map, a place where law bent to the will of whoever had the most money and men. Today, that meant James Donovan, owner of the Silver Dollar Saloon and self-proclaimed king of the county. Curious onlookers stepped aside as Katherine was forcibly dragged toward the swinging doors of the saloon, her heels digging futile grooves in the dirt. No one dared intervene, not against Donovan's men, no one except the lone figure who stood watching from the shade of the general store porch. Preston Lawson had ridden into Promise Creek just 2 days prior, his saddlebags light but his conscience heavy. At 32, his face weathered beyond his years, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen too much but still believed in something. The tin star pinned to his leather vest gleamed dully in the afternoon sun, a temporary badge granted by a desperate territorial marshal to help restore order to a lawless frontier town. Preston's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip as he watched the spectacle unfold. He'd heard whispers about Donovan's operation, the protection fees, the rigged card games, the women brought in against their will. He'd come to investigate quietly, but it seemed events were forcing his hand. "Unhand that woman," he called out, his voice carrying across the street with surprising authority. The men paused, turning toward Preston with expressions ranging from amusement to irritation. "Mind your business, stranger," called the apparent leader. "This ain't your concern." Katherine's eyes found Preston's, a mixture of defiance and desperate hope swimming in their emerald depths. "They're liars. I never stole anything." Preston stepped off the porch, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "I believe the lady said she's innocent." In civilized parts, we generally hear folks out before dragging them through the streets. A small crowd had begun to gather, sensing the brewing confrontation. The leader of Katherine's captors, a burly man with a jagged scar running through his right eyebrow, released his grip on her arm and turned to face Preston fully. "Listen here, mister. I don't know who you are, but Donovan runs this town. This thieving woman stole money from the till, and the boss wants words with her. So unless you're looking to get acquainted with the undertaker, I suggest you move along." Preston's steady gaze never wavered. "That's where you're wrong. I'm acting deputy marshal for this territory, and I don't recall Donovan being appointed judge or jury." He tapped the badge on his vest. "Now, I'll ask you once more, release the woman." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before the scarred man spat in the dirt. "Badge or no badge, you're outnumbered 3-1. He nodded to his companions, who tightened their grip on Katherine. "You want her, you can take it up with Donovan yourself." Before Preston could respond, they hauled Katherine through the swinging doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her protests echoing behind them. The saloon fell silent as the men entered with their struggling captive. The usual afternoon crowd of card players, drinkers, and working girls paused to watch the commotion. At the far end of the room, behind an ornate mahogany bar imported at great expense from St. Louis, stood James Donovan himself, a man whose elegant attire belied the ruthlessness that had built his small empire. "Well, well," Donovan drawled, setting down his crystal tumbler of bourbon. "Miss O'Brien, I hear you've been helping yourself to my money." Katherine wrenched one arm free and pushed a strand of hair from her face. "I took nothing but what I earned fair and square. You're the thief, Donovan, charging honest folks protection money and running good people out of business." Donovan's smile never reached his cold eyes. Such accusations from a woman who arrived in town with nothing but the clothes on her back. I gave you honest work serving drinks, and this is how you repay my generosity. Generosity, Katherine laughed bitterly. You call what you do to the girls upstairs generosity. Or how about what happened to old Mr. Finch when he couldn't pay your fees? A dangerous look crossed Donovan's face. He nodded to his men. Take her upstairs. Perhaps sometime in one of the rooms we'll teach her the value of discretion. The swinging doors crashed open before his order could be carried out. Preston Lawson stood framed in the doorway, the afternoon sun at his back casting him in silhouette. The badge on his chest caught the light as he stepped inside. That's far enough, Donovan, Preston said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. Every eye in the saloon turned toward him, including Katherine's. Donovan leaned casually against the bar. And who might you be, friend? Preston Lawson, acting deputy marshal. I'm investigating reports of corruption, extortion, and lawlessness in Promise Creek. His eyes scanned the room, noting the positions of Donovan's men. Besides the three holding Katherine, he counted 4 more armed men scattered throughout the saloon. Starting with the unlawful detention of this woman. A ripple of murmurs spread through the saloon. Donovan's smile tightened as he straightened his brocade vest. Marshal, you misunderstand the situation. Miss O'Brien here is an employee who was caught stealing from my establishment. I'm simply handling a private business matter. Katherine struggled against her captors. He's lying. I discovered his ledger proof he's been extorting merchants and running girls across territory lines. Donovan's composure slipped for just a moment. Take her upstairs now. The men began dragging Katherine toward the staircase. Preston's hand moved to his revolver. I won't ask again, Donovan. Release her. Donovan's eyes narrowed. He gave an almost imperceptible nod to one of his men seated at a nearby table. The man slowly reached for his gun. Preston saw the movement and drew his Colt in one fluid motion, firing a shot that splintered the table mere inches from the would-be gunman's hand. The next one won't miss, Preston warned. Chaos erupted. Patrons dove for cover as Donovan's men reached for their weapons. The 3 men holding Katherine used the distraction to drag her up the first few steps of the staircase. Preston's revolver barked twice more, dropping one of Donovan's gunmen with a shot to the shoulder. He appended a table for cover as bullets splintered the wood around him. Katherine fought with renewed vigor, stomping hard on one captor's foot and elbowing another in the ribs. She broke free for a moment before the scarred man caught her arm again, twisting it painfully behind her back. Lawson, she cried out. Preston saw her struggling on the stairs and made his decision. Rolling from behind his cover, he fired at the chandelier overhead. The massive fixture came crashing down, creating enough confusion for him to make his move. He charged across the room, dodging a wild shot from one of Donovan's men and returning fire. His bullet found its mark, and the man fell with a cry of pain, clutching his leg. At the foot of the stairs, Preston confronted the scarred man who had pulled Katherine in front of himself as a shield, a knife now pressed to her throat. Back off, lawman, or she bleeds, the man growled. Preston lowered his gun slightly, eyes locked with Katherine's. Something unspoken passed between them, a moment of pure trust. In that instant, Katherine went limp, dropping her weight unexpectedly. The man's grip faltered, and Preston lunged forward, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection. The knife clattered to the floor as both men tumbled down the remaining steps. They landed hard, wrestling for dominance. The scarred man was heavier, but Preston fought with the determination of a man who'd found something worth fighting for. A solid punch to the jaw stunned his opponent long enough for Preston to gain the upper hand. Katherine, meanwhile, had scrambled away from her other 2 captors, who were now advancing on Preston from behind. Look out. She called, grabbing a bottle from a nearby table and smashing it over one man's head. Preston dispatched the scarred man with a powerful blow that left him unconscious, then whirled to face the remaining threats. A shot rang out, and Preston felt the burn of a bullet grazing his arm. Through the haze of gunsmoke, he saw Donovan himself aiming a derringer. Enough of this, Donovan snarled, swinging his aim toward Katherine. No woman is worth this much trouble. Preston launched himself across the intervening space, tackling Katherine to the ground as Donovan's second shot whistled overhead. They rolled together behind the shelter of the overturned bar, bullets splintering wood all around them. "Are you hurt?" Preston asked, his body shielding hers, their faces inches apart in the confined space. Katherine shook her head, her breath coming in quick gasps. "No, but we're trapped. There's at least 5 more of them." Preston checked his revolver, 2 bullets remaining. "I've been in worse spots." He offered her a smile that, despite everything, made Katherine's heart skip. Though none with such pleasant company, a flush colored her cheeks even as she gave him an incredulous look. "Is this really the time for flattery, Marshal?" "Probably not," he admitted, peering over the bar to assess their situation. Donovan and his remaining men were closing in, using tables and support columns for cover. "We need a distraction." Katherine's eyes darted around their makeshift shelter, spotting a row of bottles behind the bar. "I have an idea." She grabbed a bottle of high-proof whiskey and a box of matches the bartender had left on a shelf. "When I say now, get ready to run for the door." Preston raised an eyebrow but nodded. Katherine tore a strip from her petticoat and stuffed it into the bottle, creating a makeshift fuse. "My father was in the war," she explained, seeing Preston's surprised expression. "He taught me a few things no proper lady should know." She lit the cloth and counted to 3. "Now." Katherine hurled the bottle over the bar. It shattered against the far wall, spreading flames across the dry wooden paneling. Screams and shouts erupted as fire quickly spread to the curtains and up to the second floor. In the resulting panic, Preston seized the opportunity. He holstered his gun, then in one swift motion, swept Katherine into his arms. She gasped in surprise but instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. "Hold on," he murmured, then rose and charged toward the exit. Donovan's men, distracted by the rapidly spreading fire, fired wild shots in their direction. Preston twisted to shield Katherine with his body as he shouldered through the swinging doors and out into the street. The afternoon sun momentarily blinded them as Preston carried Katherine away from the saloon. Behind them, black smoke billowed from the building, and townsfolk began to form a bucket brigade to fight the blaze. Preston didn't stop until they reached the sheriff's office at the far end of the main street. Only then did he gently set Katherine on her feet, his hands lingering at her waist to steady her. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" he asked, his eyes searching her face with concern. Katherine smoothed her tattered dress, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "Nothing that won't heal," she assured him, then frowned at the bloodstain on his shirt sleeve. "You're wounded." Preston glanced at his arm as if noticing the injury for the first time. "Just a graze." "Let me see it," she insisted, guiding him to sit on the bench outside the office. She tore another strip from her petticoat and began binding his wound with gentle, practiced hands. "Thank you," she said softly, not meeting his eyes, "for coming after me. Most men wouldn't have risked their lives for a woman they don't even know." Preston studied her face as she worked, noting the stubborn set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, and the courage that radiated from her every movement. "I think you would have found a way out even without my help," he said with a small smile. That was quick thinking with the fire. Katherine tied off the bandage and finally met his gaze. "Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." She hesitated. "You should know what I said about Donovan's ledger is true. He's been running a criminal operation out of that saloon for years. Protection rackets, smuggling, forced prostitution. I found proof in his office while cleaning." Preston nodded grimly. "That's why I was sent here. There have been rumors reaching the territorial capital. I just needed evidence." "Which is probably burning to ash as we speak," Katherine said, looking toward the smoke still rising from the silver dollar. "Donovan won't go down easily," Preston warned. "Once that fire's out, he'll come looking for both of us." Katherine squared her shoulders. "Then we'd better be ready for him." As evening settled over Promise Creek, the Silver Dollar Saloon smoldered, damaged but not destroyed. The town buzzed with rumors about the confrontation between the mysterious lawman and Donovan's gang. Most importantly, whispers spread about Katherine O'Brien's accusations against the town's most powerful man. Preston and Katherine had retreated to the sheriff's office, a small but solid building that had stood empty, since the previous sheriff had disappeared under suspicious circumstances 3 months earlier. The jail cells were empty, and a layer of dust covered most surfaces, but it offered security and a place to plan their next move. "You'll need to leave town," Preston said as he checked the loading of a shotgun he'd found in the gun cabinet. "Donovan won't stop coming after you now." Katherine, who had been examining a map of the territory pinned to the wall, turned to face him. "I'm not running," she said firmly. "I came to Promise Creek to start a new life after my father died. I've worked too hard to be chased off by a criminal like Donovan." Preston set the shotgun aside and approached her. "Katherine, these men are killers. You've seen what they're capable of. So have you, and yet you're still here," she countered. "You could have ridden away after that first confrontation, but you chose to stand and fight." Her eyes held his steadily. "Why should I do any differently?" Preston ran a hand through his dark hair, frustrated by her stubbornness yet admiring it all the same. "It's my job to stand against men like Donovan, and it's my town now," Katherine replied. "Besides, I know things about Donovan's operation that could help you bring him down: shipments, contacts, hiding places. Things that weren't in that ledger." Preston studied her for a long moment, weighing her determination against his desire to keep her safe. Finally, he sighed. "All right. But you stay close to me, and if I tell you to run, you run." "Understood," Katherine nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "Understood, Marshal." The door to the office burst open, startling them both. Preston's hand flew to his revolver, but he relaxed slightly when he recognized the round, nervous face of Morris Fletcher, the town's telegraph operator. "Marshal Lawson," Fletcher panted, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "Thought you should know Donovan's just put out a $500 bounty on both your heads, claiming you assaulted his men and burned down his property without provocation." Preston exchanged a glance with Katherine. "That didn't take long." Fletcher fidgeted with his bow tie. "That's not all. Word is he's telegraphed for reinforcements from Tucson. Hired guns. They could be here by tomorrow afternoon on the stage." Katherine moved closer to Preston, her earlier bravado tempered by this news. "How many men does he have left now?" 6 or 7 at most," Fletcher replied. "But they're holed up at his ranch outside town, and they're all armed to the teeth." Preston nodded grimly. "Thank you, Fletcher. You'd better get back before someone notices you talking to us." The telegraph operator hesitated. "For what it's worth, Marshal, not everyone in town is on Donovan's side. Miss O'Brien's been good to a lot of folks since she arrived, and some of us remember what Promise Creek was like before Donovan took over." With that, he hurried out, closing the door behind him. Preston turned to Katherine. "We need allies if we're going to survive until morning, let alone take on Donovan and his reinforcements." Katherine thought for a moment, then her expression brightened. "I know someone who might help. Samuel Hayes runs the livery stable. Donovan killed his brother last year for refusing to pay protection money, but it was made to look like an accident. Sam's been biding his time, waiting for a chance at justice." "Anyone else?" Preston asked, the widow McCreary at the boarding house. "Her late husband used to be mayor before he fell down the stairs after arguing with Donovan at a town meeting." Katherine's eyes hardened at the memory. "And there's Dr. Wilson. He's treated too many of Donovan's victims to stand by anymore." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "That's a start. But we'll need more than 3 allies to stand against Donovan's men." "Then let me go talk to people," Katherine insisted. "They know me. They trust me." "It's too dangerous for you to be seen on the streets," Preston argued. Katherine's chin lifted defiantly. "More dangerous than waiting for Donovan's men to find us here. This office isn't a fortress, Preston. If we don't gather support now, we'll be overwhelmed when those hired guns arrive tomorrow." Preston recognized the truth in her words. "Fine, but I'm coming with you." "We'll cover more ground separately," she countered. "Absolutely not," Preston said firmly. "Donovan's men are looking for both of us." Katherine stepped closer to him, close enough that he could detect the faint scent of lavender despite the day's chaos. "Preston, trust me. I survived in this town for 6 months before you arrived. I know how to move without being seen." Their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Preston relented, though his expression made clear he wasn't happy about it. 2 hours. If you're not back by then, I'm coming to find you." Katherine smiled, placing a hand briefly on his arm. I'll be back before you know it. As darkness fell over Promise Creek, Katherine moved like a shadow through backyards and alleyways, keeping to the edges of lamplight. Her first stop was the livery stable, where Samuel Hayes was closing up for the night. The tall, broad-shouldered blacksmith nearly jumped out of his skin when Katherine emerged from the shadows behind his workshop. "Miss O'Brien," he exclaimed, lowering the pitchfork he'd instinctively raised. "I heard about what happened at the saloon today. Half the town's talking about it." "And what are they saying?" Katherine asked cautiously. Sam's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "That someone finally stood up to Donovan, and it was the new girl and some lawman nobody knew was coming." The smile faded, "But they're also saying Donovan's put a price on your heads." "That's why I'm here, Sam," Katherine said earnestly. "We need help. The marshal's at the sheriff's office, but Donovan has men coming from Tucson tomorrow. If we don't stand together, he'll kill us and continue terrorizing this town." Sam was silent for a long moment, running a calloused hand over his beard. "My Annie's been telling me for months I should leave this town, start fresh somewhere Donovan can't reach, but this was my brother's home too." His eyes hardened with resolve. "Count me in, Miss O'Brien, and I know 3 or 4 others who might stand with us too." Katherine squeezed his arm gratefully. "Gather whoever you can trust, meet us at the sheriff's office in 2 hours, and Sam, be careful." Her next stop was the boarding house, where Widow McCreary ushered her in through the kitchen door with worried clucks of concern. "Child, you're in terrible danger," the older woman fussed, pressing a cup of tea into Katherine's hands. "Donovan's men came by not an hour ago, asking if anyone had seen you." "What did you tell them?" Katherine asked. Mrs. McCreary's eyes twinkled. "That I hadn't seen hide nor hair of you since yesterday, which was true at the time." Her expression grew serious. "They didn't believe me, I think." "They may be watching the house." Katherine quickly explained the situation. The widow listened intently, her arthritic hands folded in her lap. "I've been in Promise Creek for 40 years, Mrs. McCreary said when Katherine had finished. "I watched it grow from nothing, helped build the first schoolhouse, buried 2 husbands here. When James Donovan arrived 3 years ago, I thought his money would help our town prosper." Her voice hardened. "Instead, he's brought nothing but suffering. My William saw it first, God rest his soul." She rose with surprising agility for a woman of 70. "I'll speak to my boarders. The Sampson brothers lost their mining claim to Donovan's scheming. The new schoolteacher, Miss Perkins, has no love for him after what happened to her sister. And young Mr. Collins, who works at the bank, has been keeping records of Donovan's suspicious transactions." Katherine's heart lifted with each name. "You'll help us then, my dear Mrs. McCreary said, patting Katherine's cheek. "I've been waiting for someone brave enough to stand against that man, but be warned this won't be easy. Donovan has friends in the territorial government. Even if you defeat his men, there will be consequences." "One battle at a time," Katherine replied, rising to leave. "Sheriff's office in 2 hours." As she slipped back into the night, Katherine felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. They might have a chance against Donovan after all, but at what cost to these good people who were risking everything to help? Her final stop was Dr. Wilson's small clinic. The light was still on, which didn't surprise her. The doctor kept notoriously late hours. What did surprise her was finding Preston already there, his wounded arm being properly bandaged by the gray-haired physician. "Katherine," Preston exclaimed, standing so quickly that the doctor huffed in annoyance and pulled him back down to finish his work. "What happened to 2 hours?" Katherine asked, closing the door behind her. Preston had the grace to look sheepish. "I was concerned about the wound getting infected, and I thought the doctor might be willing to help us." "He's already convinced me," Dr. Wilson said dryly, tying off the bandage. "Though I must say, Miss O'Brien, your nursing skills aren't half bad. This might have been a much uglier wound without your quick attention." Katherine felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "Thank you, doctor. I take it Preston has told you what we're planning." The doctor nodded, his expression grave. "A dangerous undertaking, but perhaps necessary. Donovan has ruled by fear for too long." He moved to a cabinet and unlocked it, removing a revolver. "I swore an oath to do no harm, but sometimes a show of force is the only medicine certain ailments respond to. Preston looked between them. Did you find others willing to help? Katherine nodded. Sam Hayes is gathering men he trusts, and Mrs. McCreary is rallying her boarders. They'll meet us at the sheriff's office in, she glanced at the doctor's clock, about an hour and a half now. Good work, Preston said, and the warmth in his voice made Katherine's heart flutter unexpectedly. We should head back and prepare. As they made their way through the darkened streets, Preston kept close to Katherine, his hand occasionally brushing her arm to guide her away from patches of lamplight or potential observers. Each brief contact sent a thrill through her that she tried to dismiss as merely the excitement of the moment. How's the arm? She asked to distract herself. Better, Preston replied. The doctor says you probably saved me from a nasty infection. They paused at an intersection, checking for any sign of Donovan's men before proceeding. In the shadows of her recessed doorway, Preston suddenly pulled Katherine close, pressing her against the wall. Her breath caught at their proximity. Don't move, he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Two men walked by on the street not 10 feet from where they hid, rifles cradled in their arms. Katherine recognized them as Donovan's hired guns. She held perfectly still, acutely aware of Preston's body shielding hers, his hand resting lightly but protectively on her waist. Only when the men had passed did Preston step back slightly, though he remained close. Sorry about that, he murmured. Though he didn't sound entirely sorry, Katherine looked up at him, suddenly finding it difficult to remember why they were hiding in the first place. No need to apologize for keeping us alive, she whispered back. Something shifted in Preston's gaze as it dropped briefly to her lips. For a heartbeat, Katherine thought he might kiss her, and more surprisingly, she realized she wanted him to. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a saloon piano starting up. Preston cleared his throat and stepped back. We should keep moving. They reached the sheriff's office without further incident, slipping in through the back door. Once inside, Preston immediately began taking inventory of their weapons and ammunition, while Katherine found an old coffee pot and set about making a fresh brew. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. Why did you really come to Promise Creek? Preston finally asked, setting aside the shotgun he'd been cleaning. It's not exactly a place most young women would choose to start over. Katherine paused in her task. My father died last year pneumonia. We had a small ranch outside of Denver, but there were debts I couldn't pay. After the bank took everything, I needed somewhere to go. She smiled sadly. I chose Promise Creek because the stagecoach fare was cheap, and I'd heard they needed help at the general store. I'm sorry about your father, Preston said softly. Katherine nodded her thanks. When that position fell through, Donovan offered me work at the saloon, not as. She hesitated. I understand, Preston assured her. Just serving drinks, Katherine continued. It paid enough for a room at Mrs. McCreary's and meals. I was saving to maybe open a small dressmaking shop someday. She laughed without humor. Seems foolish now. Preston moved closer, leaning against the desk beside her. It's not foolish to have dreams. What about you? Katherine asked. You don't strike me as a career lawman. A shadow passed across Preston's features. I was a Texas Ranger for 8 years, left after. He paused, searching for words. After a situation went bad, a family died because I trusted the wrong person. I couldn't wear the badge after that. Katherine's hand found his, squeezing gently. Yet here you are, wearing one again. Preston looked down at their joined hands. Marshal Bennett is an old friend. When he heard rumors about Promise Creek, he asked me to investigate unofficially. Said sometimes, a man needs a second chance to remember who he really is. His eyes met hers. I never expected to find someone like you here. The air between them grew charged with unspoken feelings. Katherine was achingly aware of how close they stood, how easy it would be to lean forward, to close the distance between them. A knock at the door shattered the moment. They sprang apart as Sam Hayes entered, followed by 4 determined-looking men. Miss O'Brien, Marshal, Sam greeted them. These boys are ready to take a stand. Over the next hour, their allies trickled in Mrs. McCreary with 3 of her boarders, Dr. Wilson, and several others who had suffered under Donovan's rule. By midnight, 17 people had gathered in the small sheriff's office, a mixture of shopkeepers, ranchers, and ordinary townsfolk. Preston stood before them, his presence commanding their attention without raising his voice. "What we're planning won't be easy," he told them frankly. "Donovan has men who kill for money, and they won't hesitate to gun down anyone who stands against them. I won't think less of anyone who chooses to walk away now." No one moved. Katherine stepped forward to stand beside Preston. "Donovan has ruled Promise Creek through fear for too long. Together, we can take back our town." Sam Hayes rested his shotgun across his broad shoulders. "Just tell us the plan, Marshal." Preston nodded, unrolling a rough map of the town on the desk. "Donovan's expecting reinforcements on tomorrow's afternoon stage. We need to move before they arrive. His remaining men are currently at his ranch outside town, but they'll likely return at first light to continue searching for us." He outlined his strategy, positioning men at key points around town, setting up ambush points, and ultimately forcing a confrontation at the courthouse rather than risking civilian casualties by fighting throughout the town. "Our goal isn't to kill them," Preston emphasized. "It's to arrest Donovan and his men and bring them to proper justice. I have the authority to hold them until the circuit judge arrives next week." As the meeting broke up, with people assigned to positions and tasks for the morning, Katherine found herself both exhausted and exhilarated. The prospect of freedom from Donovan's tyranny seemed tantalizingly close, yet the danger ahead was very real. Preston approached her as the last of their allies departed. "You should get some rest," he suggested. "There's a cot in the back room." Katherine shook her head. "I'm too wound up to sleep." She studied his face, noting the fatigue lines around his eyes. "But you should. I'll keep watch for a while." Preston started to protest, but Katherine placed her fingers gently against his lips. "Don't argue, Marshal. You were shot today. Even heroes need sleep." The touch of her fingers seemed to momentarily fluster him. He caught her hand in his, lowering it slowly but not releasing it. "Katherine," he began. "Preston," she countered, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met," he said simply. Katherine's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. "You're not so ordinary yourself, Marshal Lawson." Something pulled between them, a tension both had been fighting since their first meeting. Preston's free hand moved to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as if she might break or disappear. "If tomorrow goes badly," he started. "It won't," Katherine whispered, leaning into his touch. "But if it does," Preston persisted, "I'd regret not doing this." He bent his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Katherine rose slightly on her tiptoes, meeting him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared hunger and the release of the day's tensions. Katherine's arms wound around his neck as Preston pulled her closer, his hands spanning her waist. The kiss spoke of newfound feelings, of possibilities neither had dared consider before, and of the uncertain future that awaited them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "That was long overdue," Katherine finished for him, her smile radiant despite her flushed cheeks. Preston chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly through his chest. "I was going to say perfect, but your assessment works too." Katherine stepped back reluctantly. "Now will you get some rest?" Preston caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Only if you'll sit with me until I fall asleep." She agreed, and they moved to the small back room where a narrow cot stood against one wall. Preston stretched out, grimacing slightly as his injured arm adjusted to the position. Katherine sat beside him on the edge of the cot, her hand finding his. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Preston murmured, his voice already heavy with approaching sleep. Katherine thought for a moment. "I can speak French. My mother was from New Orleans." Preston smiled without opening his eyes. "Say something." "Je crois que je pourrais tomber amoureuse de toi," Katherine whispered. "What does that mean?" Preston asked, his voice fading. "I'll tell you tomorrow," Katherine promised, "after we've won." Preston's breathing soon deepened into sleep, his features relaxing in a way Katherine hadn't seen before. She watched him for a long time, marveling at how this man who had been a stranger just a day ago had become so important to her so quickly. Eventually, she carefully extricated her hand from his, and moved to the main office to take up her watch, her mind filled with thoughts of both the coming battle and the kiss that had changed everything. Dawn broke over Promise Creek, with streaks of crimson and gold painting the eastern sky. Katherine had dozed in the sheriff's chair despite her intentions to stay alert, and she woke with a start at the sound of movement in the back room. Preston emerged, looking refreshed despite the early hour and the challenges ahead. He'd found time to shave, and his dark hair was damp from washing. The sight of him made Katherine's heart skip treacherously. "Morning," he greeted her with a smile that suggested he was remembering their kiss as vividly as she was. "Any trouble during the night?" Katherine shook her head, stretching to ease the stiffness in her neck. "Quiet as a church on Monday." Preston checked his pocket watch. "Our people should be taking up positions now. Donovan's men typically ride in from his ranch at first light to relieve those who stayed in town overnight." As if on cue, Samuel Hayes slipped in through the back door. "Marshal, Miss O'Brien," he acknowledged them with a nod. "Riders coming in from the east rode 5 of them, all armed, and there's activity at Donovan's house in town. Looks like they're gathering." Preston strapped on his gun belt. "Right on schedule. Sam, make sure everyone's in position. No one moves until they hear my signal 3 shots in quick succession." Sam nodded and disappeared as quietly as he'd arrived. Katherine moved to the window, peeking through the curtains at the brightening street. "Do you think Donovan's suspects we've organized resistance?" Preston joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Hard to say. A man like that always expects trouble, but he's arrogant enough to believe no one would dare stand against him openly." Katherine turned to face him, suddenly needing to say something before events overtook them. "Preston, about last night." He met her gaze steadily. "I meant it, Katherine, every bit of it." "So did I," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just we barely know each other, and today might." Preston cupped her face in his hands. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and kind and fiercer than most men I've ridden with. I know you care about this town and its people. And I know that when I'm with you, I feel like the man I always wanted to be." Katherine's eyes shimmered with emotion. "That might be the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me." Preston smiled, brushing his thumb lightly over her cheekbone. "Remember that when bullets start flying." A commotion outside drew their attention back to the window. Donovan himself had appeared on the street, flanked by 8 armed men. They were moving methodically from building to building, clearly searching for the fugitives. "Time to go," Preston said grimly, checking his revolver one last time. "Stay close to me." They slipped out the back door of the sheriff's office and moved through the alleyway toward the courthouse, which stood at the center of town, a 2-story brick building that represented what little official law existed in Promise Creek. Their allies had positioned themselves strategically on rooftops, in alleyways, behind water troughs and wagons. The ordinary citizens of Promise Creek had vanished from the streets, warned to stay indoors until the confrontation was resolved one way or another. Preston and Katherine reached the courthouse steps just as Donovan and his men emerged onto the main street less than 50 yards away. For a moment, both parties froze, sizing each other up across the dusty expanse. "Donovan," Preston called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "It's over. You're under arrest for extortion, kidnapping, and murder." James Donovan's handsome face twisted with rage. "You're a dead man, Lawson, you and that thieving woman both." He turned to his men. "Kill them. $1,000 to the man who brings me their heads." Before his men could raise their weapons, Preston fired 3 quick shots into the air, the signal. Instantly, the hidden townsfolk revealed themselves, guns trained on Donovan's surprised men. From rooftops, from behind barrels, from windows and doorways, 17 determined citizens showing Donovan that his reign of terror had come to an end. "Drop your weapons," Preston commanded. "You're surrounded." For a tense moment, it seemed Donovan's men might fight anyway. Then one by one, seeing the hopelessness of their position, they began lowering their guns to the ground, all except Donovan himself. With a snarl of fury, he drew a hidden derringer and aimed directly at Katherine. "If I'm going down, she goes first." Preston moved with lightning speed, pushing Katherine behind him as Donovan's shot cracked across the street. Pain exploded in Preston's shoulder, but he maintained his footing, raising his revolver with a steady hand. "Don't," he warned as Donovan fumbled to reload the small two-shot Derringer. Donovan's eyes blazed with hatred. "You think this changes anything? I own judges from here to Santa Fe. I'll be out within a week." "Not this time," came a new voice from behind Donovan. Everyone turned to see a tall, distinguished man in a dusty black coat step down from a just-arrived stagecoach. He wore a badge similar to Preston's, but his carried the full weight of federal authority. "Marshal Bennett," Preston acknowledged with a nod, keeping his gun trained on Donovan. "Lawson," the older marshal returned the greeting. "I received your telegram yesterday. Thought you might need some official backup." He turned his cold gaze to Donovan. "James Donovan, I have warrants for your arrest from 3 territories. You'll be facing a federal judge, not your bought and paid for local variety." The fight seemed to drain out of Donovan all at once. His shoulders slumped, and the Derringer fell from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Katherine rushed to Preston's side as he swayed slightly, blood staining his shirt where Donovan's bullet had struck. "Dr. Wilson," she called urgently. The town physician hurried forward as Sam Hayes and 2 others took custody of Donovan and his men, marching them toward the jail. "Let's get him inside," Dr. Wilson instructed, supporting Preston's uninjured side while Katherine took the other. They brought him into the courthouse, where the doctor quickly examined the wound. "Clean through the meat of the shoulder," he reported. "Painful but not life-threatening if we prevent infection." Katherine held Preston's hand tightly as the doctor cleaned and bandaged the wound. "You shouldn't have done that," she scolded, tears threatening despite her attempt at a stern tone. "Standing in front of me like that." Preston's smile was tired but genuine. "Would you have done any differently if our positions were reversed?" Katherine couldn't lie. "No." "Then don't ask me to regret it," Preston said simply. Marshal Bennett entered as the doctor was finishing his work. "The prisoners are secured," he informed them. "Federal marshals will arrive with the next stage to transport Donovan to Tucson for trial." He approached Preston, his expression softening with concern. "How bad is it, son?" "I'll live," Preston assured him, attempting to sit up straighter and wincing at the effort. Bennett nodded, then turned his attention to Katherine. "And you must be Miss O'Brien. Preston's telegram spoke highly of your courage." Katherine blushed. "I only did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong, miss," Bennett said kindly. "Most folks would have kept their heads down and stayed out of trouble. It takes a special kind of person to stand up against tyranny, especially knowing the cost." He looked back at Preston. "When you're recovered, there's a permanent position waiting for you. The territory needs good men who remember what the badge really stands for." Preston's eyes found Katherine's. "Thank you, sir, but I'll need some time to consider it. I might have reasons to stay in Promise Creek." Bennett followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. "I see. Well, the offer stands. Take all the time you need." He touched the brim of his hat. "I should help organize things outside. This town has a lot of healing to do." Left alone with Preston, Katherine felt suddenly shy. "Did you mean that?" "About having reasons to stay." Preston reached for her hand, drawing her closer. "I meant it. If you'll have me, that is." "Have you?" Katherine repeated, her heart racing. "Preston, we've known each other for all of 2 days." "Sometimes 2 days is enough to know what matters," he said earnestly. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet anyway." His smile turned teasing at her widened eyes. "But I'd like to stay in Promise Creek, help rebuild it into what it should be. And I'd like to court you properly, Katherine O'Brien, if you're amenable." Katherine couldn't help the laugh that bubbled up. "Amenable? Is that the most romantic word you could find, Marshal Lawson?" Preston grinned, tugging her gently until she perched on the edge of the table beside him. "How about this? I think I'm falling in love with you, and I'd like the chance to fall the rest of the way." Katherine's breath caught. "That's better," she whispered, leaning down to kiss him softly. "And yes, I'm very amenable to that arrangement." 3 months passed, bringing changes to Promise Creek that few could have imagined during Donovan's reign. The town elected a proper mayor, Samuel Hayes, whose integrity and strength made him the natural choice. Dr. Wilson began training a young assistant, ensuring the town's medical needs would be met for years to come. Mrs. McCreary expanded her boarding house to include a proper restaurant that quickly became the heart of the community. Preston accepted the position of town sheriff, working closely with territorial authorities to ensure Promise Creek remained free from the corruption that had nearly destroyed it. James Donovan was convicted in federal court and sentenced to 20 years in a territorial prison, his criminal empire dismantled piece by piece. As for Katherine, she realized her dream of opening a dressmaking shop, using skills learned from her mother to create garments that soon attracted customers from neighboring settlements. The small storefront on Main Street, with its cheerful blue door and window boxes filled with wildflowers, became a gathering place for the women of Promise Creek. And each evening, after closing her shop, Katherine would walk the short distance to the sheriff's office, where Preston would be waiting to escort her home first to Mrs. McCreary's boarding house, and later, after a proper courtship that set the town's gossips atwater, to the small house they purchased together on the edge of town. Their wedding, held in the town square under a canopy of paper lanterns on a warm June evening, became the celebration Promise Creek had long needed, a symbol of renewal and hope after years of fear. Marshal Bennett returned to give the bride away in place of her father, and it seemed the entire town turned out to witness their vows. As summer turned to autumn, Preston and Katherine settled into a rhythm of shared days and nights, each discovering in the other a partner who complemented their strengths and supported them through challenges. Their house, once a neglected property, bloomed under their care, with Katherine's garden surrounding the porch Preston had built as a wedding gift. On a crisp October evening, they sat together on that porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Katherine's head rested on Preston's shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Do you ever think about how quickly everything changed?" she asked, her fingers intertwined with his. "If Donovan's men hadn't dragged me into that saloon that day, I would have found another reason to meet you," Preston replied with certainty. "Some things are just meant to be," Katherine smiled, turning to face him. "Is that so, Sheriff Lawson? I never took you for a believer in destiny." Preston brushed a strand of honey-brown hair from her face, his touch still sending shivers through her after all these months. "I believe in making choices, Katherine, and fighting for what matters." His expression grew serious. "Every day I choose you. That's better than destiny, it's a promise." "I have something to tell you," Katherine said, her eyes shining with a secret she'd been keeping for 2 weeks. She took his hand and placed it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to need a bigger house." Preston's expression transformed from confusion to wonder as understanding dawned. We're, Katherine nodded, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "In the spring. Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday." With a whoop of pure elation, Preston lifted her into his arms, spinning them both in circles until Katherine laughed for him to stop. He set her down gently, then knelt before her, pressing a reverent kiss to her abdomen. "A family," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Our family." Katherine ran her fingers through his dark hair, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "I love you, Preston Lawson, more than I thought possible when you carried me out of that saloon." Preston rose to his feet, gathering her close. "And I love you, Katherine Lawson. More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, their lives intertwined in a love story neither could have imagined on that dust, choked afternoon when fate or choice had brought them together in Promise Creek. 20 years later, on the anniversary of the day that would forever be known in Promise Creek as Donovan's last stand, the town gathered for its annual celebration. The main street, now paved and lined with prosperous businesses, was decorated with bunting and lanterns. Children played games on the courthouse lawn, while their parents reminisced about how far their community had come. At the center of it all stood Sheriff Preston Lawson, his dark hair now streaked with silver at the temples, his face weathered by years of frontier sun, but his eyes as keen and kind as ever. Beside him, Katherine Lawson, still beautiful at 43, had just finished giving a speech as the town's mayor, a position she had accepted 5 years earlier when Samuel Hayes decided to retire. Their 3 children watched proudly from the front row 19-year-old Emily, who had inherited her father's sense of justice and was studying law in Denver. 17-year-old James, named for Preston's father, already showing promise as a deputy under his father's guidance, and 14-year-old Sarah, who had her mother's talent with needle and thread and dreamed of fashion houses in San Francisco. As the formal ceremonies concluded and music began to play for dancing, Preston took Katherine's hand and led her away from the crowd, toward the old oak tree at the edge of the square. It was their spot, the place where he had proposed properly after 3 months of courtship, where they had shared countless private moments over the years. 20 years, Katherine marveled, leaning against the trunk. Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Preston's arms encircled her waist, as familiar and welcome as the day's first light. Best 20 years of my life, he murmured against her hair, which still carried the faint scent of lavender she had always favored. Katherine smiled up at him. Even when I convinced you to let Emily learn to shoot, or when James broke his arm falling from the livery roof, or when Sarah released all those frogs in the church during Sunday service, Preston chuckled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with mirth. Especially then. Every moment, good or difficult, has been a gift because I shared it with you. Katherine's expression softened with love. After all these years, he could still make her heart race with a look, a touch, a simple word. Do you remember what you said to me that day in the courthouse? After Donovan was arrested, Preston nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I said I was falling in love with you and I wanted the chance to fall the rest of the way. And did you? Katherine asked, her voice teasing but with an undercurrent of genuine curiosity. Fall the rest of the way. Preston's answer was to draw her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the passion of their youth tempered by the deep, abiding love that had grown between them over 2 decades of shared life. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm still falling, he whispered. Every day a little more. From across the square, their youngest daughter's voice called out, Ma, Pa, they're cutting the anniversary cake. James says he'll eat your pieces if you don't come now. Katherine laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when Preston first heard it. We'd better go before our son creates a scandal. Preston kept her hand in his as they walked back toward the celebration, toward the life they had built together from the ashes of Promise Creek's darkest days. As the townspeople raised their glasses in a toast to the couple whose courage had changed everything, Preston's eyes met Katherine's over the rim of his cup, and the look that passed between them spoke of a love story that had only just begun that day in the saloon, when a determined deputy fought through every man to rescue a woman who, in truth, had ended up rescuing him just as surely. And in that moment, surrounded by their children, their friends, and the community they had helped build, Preston and Katherine Lawson knew that their greatest adventure had been finding each other, and their greatest achievement was the love they renewed with each passing day in the heart of Promise Creek.